Hi everyone! Today I have an eyeshadow palette review on the Anastasia Beverly Hills Prism palette. Now, this is one that I held off buying for a few weeks until a few other reviews had popped up for it because I didn't want to succumb to the hype, which is what I had done with Subculture, and I was so deeply disappointed in Subculture that I kind of wanted to see a little bit more of a review before I picked up Prism. So to explain a little bit with Subculture, it was a beautiful palette. I was so excited to own it, and then when I tested it out and I saw other people's opinions on it, it was just powdery, patchy, unblendable. The kick up was so intense. It was unlike anything Anastasia has ever put out before. And I've got 2 or 3 of her other palettes. And yes, those are quite powdery in general, probably some of the most powdery eyeshadows that I own, but Subculture was on a whole nother level. There was just something inherently wrong with that product and that palette that I wanted nothing to do with it. So I returned that palette, which made me really nervous about picking up Prism. I do have to say though that this came out so soon after Subculture was released that I can't help but wonder why the formula would be any different between this one and Subculture. Now, we'll get into the review, but my general consensus is that this does not play out like Subculture did, so I feel like the formula is different, but they should have been manufactured around the same time, so I don't really understand why one's formula is so drastically different compared to another one that came out relatively soon thereafter. Alright, so let's actually get into talking about Prism. So this is the palette. It is a limited edition holiday launch, which means when it's gone, or it should be gone, as who knows about limited edition products these days, they seem to keep coming back. But as far as I'm aware, this is a limited edition product, so once the holidays are over, it should be gone. It does come in this velvet packaging that I know not a lot of people are a fan of, but I'm one of the people out there that really likes this kind of packaging. I love the original Urban Decay Naked packaging, and I wish they had stayed with that, and that's exactly what this stuff is. It's that soft velvet finish that, yep, it's gonna attract a lot of dust and powder, but it brushes off just fine. So it is cardboard packaging, it is fairly slim, it's easy to open with a magnetic closure, and you open it up and you've got a mirror up here which is serviceable. I'm not a huge fan, I'll try to angle it away so you're not too blinded by the light. I'm not a huge fan of these mirrors that are quite slim and rectangular, although I realize that it does make it quite compact for the palette because it's pretty small, like that fits in my hand. So the palette does come with a brush. I have it in here, and I have to say, generally I think these are garbage, but it did come in handy for one shade in particular, which we'll get into in a minute. This palette does come with 14 eyeshadows, which range from what they call metallics, some duochromes, and also some ultra mattes, which are basically just a matte shadow. You do get 14 shadows in here, and they do only contain 0.7 grams of product. In general, an eyeshadow that is a typical size, I would say, like a MAC eyeshadow or a Makeup Geek one, comes with 1.5 grams of product, so you are getting less than half in here. You can make the decision on whether or not you think that that is too little for you, but the price tag associated with this is 55 Canadian and 42 American. That exchange rate does seem a little bit extreme, but that is pretty close to on par with what the dollar is right now versus the American exchange rate. I think converted is about 42 American is 53 US, so it does equal out, even though it sounds like such a steep jump to go from 42 to 55. So in looking up a little bit about this palette, one of the interesting things that the creators had mentioned in a promotional video for this palette was that because it's a holiday release, they don't necessarily need to follow trends. They can just grab pretty shades that they like and then whack them in there because it's a limited edition product, it's gonna be gone. So what if it's not necessarily on trend right now? And I have to say, I kind of like that approach to it. It was really like, I think something's pretty, so I'm gonna put it in there. And I think that's a neat way of looking at it. I have to say though, in looking at it, that's exactly what somebody did. I feel like this color arrangement is so bizarre. I'm not mad at it, but it's such a strange setting of colors. I always feel a little bit disjointed when a palette is not arranged from lightest to darkest. And I don't necessarily feel that the reshuffling of the color order ever really inspires me. More often than not, it usually leaves me going, what the heck do I do? So while I have been inspired by this palette, I do feel like the color selection is just utterly bizarre. I mean, This does veer quite warm in general. You're left with pretty much like 3 orange shades with Eden here, Saturn, and Eternal. Those are all warm orange shade, which is very dominant in this palette. Even the brown does lean quite orange, so it's more of an orange geared palette, which makes blending out some of these other colors a little bit bizarre. And then this color up here, Sphere, this bright neon yellow is pretty, and it's on my inner corner today, but it doesn't really look like it goes with the palette very much. I think a lot of people are gonna look at this and just be like, what do I do now? I like it, but it's a weird one. There are 14 shadows in here. I'm gonna slide in some swatches now so you can see them up close. Alright, now that you've seen the shadows swatched out, let's talk about them a little bit more in depth. The mattes are flawless. Even this neon one over here is beautiful. They are pigmented, they are buttery, they are smooth, soft, and blendable. I love them so much. I feel like the foils were a bit of a mixed bag overall. Eternal, which is this bright copper shade, is gorgeous. Flawless. Put that on the lid and call it a day. It is beautiful. Throne is on my lid today, and it's quite pretty. It does have a bit of a black base, so when you buff it out, some of the turquoise aspect of it tends to buff away, and you're left with a little bit more of like an ashy sheen. You can layer it and buff it out a little bit more to keep that color, but it's just something to be aware of. Osiris is garbage. I hate this shadow so much. I really struggled to use it, and it was only once I went in with the brush from the palette and used this short flat side that I was able to actually get it to stick to my lid. Otherwise, I would not recommend using that shadow at all. It doesn't blend, it doesn't really move around very well. It just kind of has to be plopped on your lid, and that's it. Don't do anything else with it. Sphinx up here is a little bit of a funny color to me. It is pigmented, it does go on the lids quite well, but it doesn't really want to move too much once you get it on the lid. It's kind of like you pat it on, drag it a millimeter, and that's it. It won't move anymore. It does blend out at the edges, but it's very particular on how it wants to be placed on your lid. Dimension is another great lid shade here. In general, I feel like there's a lot of lid shades because it's not too often that you want to put shimmery dark colors in your crease, because also they don't tend to blend out that well either. But Dimension is great on the lid. I like mixing this on the lid with Osiris in the crease. Not something I normally do, again, because it is shimmery, but when used with this brush, which is funny to use the smaller side on the outer corner, it did work out decently well. In terms of crease colors, you're a little bit limited. I would really only put Lure Straight in my crease. Unity doesn't really work on my skin tone. I have to mix it a little bit with Eden, but Eden on its own does work as a crease color for sure. Now that we've discussed the palette a little bit, let's take a look at some other looks that I created. This first one has Eternal on the lid with Saturn in the crease. Of course, I couldn't just leave it with the orange shades. I had to add some dimension. So I used Parallel, which is that deeper brown in the outer corner, and then I added a little bit of Obsidian, which is the black, just in the outer V to try to deepen it up a little bit. And I do have Lucid on the inner corner, which is mostly how I tended to prefer using that shadow. So on the next look here, I have Pyramid on the lid, which really surprised me. It came out a lot more orange tinge than I was expecting looking at it in the pan. Beautiful nonetheless, it just kind of surprised me. I have Osiris through the crease and outer corner, and this is where it was really a mess. I was trying to use a buffing brush to kind of blend that in, and it just was not ever looking good. So I ended up throwing a little bit of Lure through the top of my crease to try to blend that out, and I still think it looks patchy. I do have a little bit of Throne between Osiris and Pyramid, just because I felt like the colors weren't going together very well. Lucid is also on the inner corner as well. I have to say with this look, I'm not a fan of it. It was kind of a learning curve for me because I was discovering that Osiris wasn't really playing how I wanted it to play, and then I kept having to add more color to try to blend it out. So for me, this was not a favorite look. The third look that I did was a lot more up my alley. So I liked the way that Lure in the crease had looked on the previous day, so I did that again, and then this time I put Dimension on the lid, which is a beautiful color. I absolutely love that. And then I put Osiris through the crease, and then that's when I reached for the brush that came with the palette and really jammed that into my crease. I really wanted to make this thing work. I think it still looks a little bit choppy, but it's much better than the previous day. And then of course I have Lucid on the inner corner again. It does make for a really great inner corner highlight, but I feel like I was a little bit repetitive with the placement of that shadow. The fourth look that I did used Eden through the crease, and honestly I don't feel like Eden looks that much different than a Saturn. It's just a little bit more muted of an orange. I guess it does have a little bit of a pink hint to it, but to me on the lids it still comes out quite orange. I put Sphinx on the lid, and then this is where I just didn't want to move very well, but as you can see it's very pigmented. On the outer corner I did add Parallel to deepen it up with a little bit of Obsidian in the outer V just to make it a little bit deeper where the edge of my wing is. For today's look, I tried using Unity again through my crease just to try to make it work, and I'm not sure I was really liking it, but I was going to come back to it later. So I ended up putting Throne all over my lid and along my lower lash line. And then the only shadow that I hadn't used yet was Sphere, so I decided to put that on the inner corner of my eye, which is not something that I do very often, but I quite like the look of it, so that worked out for me. A little bit of Saturn just on top of Unity because, I don't know, there's something about the tone of Unity that just does not work for my crease. Okay, so you saw the Prism palette in action. You saw swatches, you saw some looks that I did with it. So I'm curious to hear what you think of this palette. For me, I think the quality is there. I think it's so much better than Subculture. It's not as good as Modern Renaissance, but I think that one is just going to be near impossible to replicate. Not only in the sense that the shadows are excellent in quality, but also the combination of colors was so perfect with that palette. With this one, I think it's worth the money, but I still come back to this being such a bizarre combination of shades. Again, I don't know how many people are going to feel inspired looking at this, so I'm curious to hear your feedback. I do think it is worth the price tag. I don't feel like the shadow quality is not worthy of 55 bucks, so I think the money spend is worth it. It's just going to be up to you to decide whether or not you think the shadows are going to be something that you're drawn to on a frequent enough basis to justify the price. So I'll end it there and let me know your thoughts. I'm curious to hear whether or not you guys thought that Prism was better than Subculture, whether or not you think it's the same, because I know not everybody had the same opinion on Subculture. But yeah, let me know what you're thinking about Prism. Thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you next time. Bye!